What if I told you that you might be making it a lot harder for you to learn how to improve your pronunciation, have more of an American accent, and reduce your foreign accent? And really just improve your spoken English. You might be making it harder. Listen, I'm an Anglophone in Canada and an American accent coach, and I see language learners and more specifically, English learners that are able to successfully improve the pronunciation, as well as other English learners or other general language learners that, well, aren't that successful. I'm going to be sharing with you how you can improve your pronunciation easier and faster than most English learners. Because I'd say that most either do things that they shouldn't be doing, or they will just expect that as they learn English, they will just passively take in English and become perfect without putting in intentional effort. There are also other English learners that just don't really know where to start and what to do. And also English learners that, well, don't realize that they have an accent or do not realize that they're kind of difficult to understand. So I've made a list of some do's and don'ts. So I guess some don'ts and do's. And these are things that you should not do if you want to be successful and effective, and things that you should be doing. So first off, don't not have a plan. It's important to be intentional and to have a plan and know what you want to improve and be intentional in your English language learning and your plan, which we'll talk about a little later in this video. The next one is don't learn from those with foreign accents. And I'm talking about for those who want to improve the pronunciation and reduce the foreign accent. And listen, there are a lot of great English teachers that have an accent, a foreign accent, and many that could teach grammar in ways that a lot of native speakers can't. However, if your goal is to improve your pronunciation and reduce your foreign accent, I really highly suggest that by the time you hit an intermediate level, that you, find a teacher or coach or tutor or language partner that has the accent that you want to have. So do choose the accent you want. Maybe you want an Australian accent. Maybe you want a British accent. Maybe you want an American accent. If you're subscribed to me, you probably want an American accent. This is because, as I've mentioned in my free accent reduction mini course, type the word framework down in the comments if you'd like to have access to that. So in this training, this little mini course, I talk about why some language learners have a foreign accent. And usually it's because somewhere along the line of learning, they were surrounded by people who speak English with that foreign accent. And that could be a teacher. So in my case, when I was learning French, a lot of my teachers spoke French as a second language. So I adopted some of that foreign accent, if that makes sense. So if your English teacher has, I don't know, maybe an Indian accent, and they teach you, that's going to be the English that you acquire, right? So that's why I would say at the intermediate level, it's really important, especially early intermediate level, that you have a coach, tutor, partner that has the accent that you want. Because at that stage, your pronunciation starts to solidify and become a habit. And it can be harder to break. Not impossible, but it can be more difficult and will take more work to improve. Next, don't be inconsistent. You'll want regular exposure and practice. And no, this does not mean spending 3 or 5 hours on a Sunday practicing English, listening to English, and whatnot. This can mean just, 5 to 10 minutes per day or almost every day, because that constant exposure is going to be really helpful and really effective. And this is a way that we're going to be able to learn a lot with minimal effort, because it's going to be a lot more effective. Next don't is let's not do untargeted random studying or practice. And I put studying in quotation marks because I'm not a huge fan of the way that we're taught to study a language, but just randomly studying a language. I have a friend who studied the dictionary and read the dictionary. I personally don't feel like that is a very effective way, especially when it's like just random. My advice is to be really strategic in what you are learning, to be really targeted in your approach, which I will get into more detail with. after I talk about the next don't, which is not getting regular feedback, So, as you are on your accent reduction journey, or even just trying to improve your pronunciation so that you can be understood, it's important to get feedback regularly, because you might think that you are improving or that you've learned a correct sound. And you might think, wow, I just learned this sound that's in American English. But for a native speaker, that might still sound wrong. And then if you continue to practice it because you think it's correct, well, you're not really improving and you're wasting a lot of time and energy. So the opposite of that would be to get regular feedback from, ideally, a native speaker, someone who has the accent that you want. So it might not be a native speaker. It might be just someone who has a near native accent or a native accent. This could be a language partner. This could be a tutor, a friend, and whatnot. So get that feedback to make sure that you are not putting in a lot of work for nothing, because your time and energy is really valuable. Now, let's get back to talking about being strategic. So I'm going to share with you the general steps that I share, that I encourage people to take in order to improve their accent, more specifically, the American accent. Step number 1 is to learn the sounds that you mispronounce, that you have not mastered. And a way to be strategic would be to find out which sounds are difficult for people who speak the same native language as you, because the reason why it is a difficult sound is because it's a sound that probably doesn't exist in your native language. Which brings me to a resource that you may appreciate, and it's called Mastering the American Accent. It has a section in the back where it shares with you if is your first language, then here are the sounds that you probably mispronounce. So this is a really helpful reference for you. So rather than just guessing, well, I think I mispronounced this, I think I might mispronounce that, look at the list. You'll have a more targeted approach. And I encourage you to get feedback along the way to see which sounds you actually mispronounce, because maybe you don't mispronounce all these. And if you're interested in checking out this native language guide, here are the languages that are included. So we have Chinese, Farsi, Filipino languages, French, German, Indian languages, Indonesian, Japanese, Korean, Portuguese, Russian, Spanish, and Vietnamese. So there aren't all the languages, however, a lot of popular languages. So find out which sounds are hard for people who speak your language as a first language, and then see which sounds you mispronounce. Then you might be asking yourself, well, where do I start? It could be extremely overwhelming when you start off, especially if you have a thicker accent, because there may be a lot of sounds that you mispronounce. However, I highly suggest that you start with the most obvious sounds. Why? Well, it takes less effort to have greater results, and this is going to really encourage you to continue. Also, I think it's important to just work smarter, not harder. And just by tweaking a few sounds, you might be surprised with how much clearer your pronunciation and your accent is. Or should I say are? I'm not a grammar teacher. I'm just an English speaker. Which is something else to note, is that a lot of native English speakers make little grammatical mistakes, but they're different from the mistakes that a lot of English learners make. So on a side note, I am talking about improving your pronunciation, improving your accent, but also know that when you make obvious English mistakes, that is also going to share with others that English is not your first language. So if you want to improve your English and make less mistakes, especially less obvious mistakes, I highly suggest that you check out this app that I've found. It's called langotalk, and you can talk to different AI bots. And if you turn on the feedback function, it will actually give you instant feedback. So you can constantly learn which mistakes you make so that you can improve yourself, one comment and one conversation at a time. But back to our plan. So you found out the sounds that are more difficult for your language profile. You work on what's most obvious. What I mentioned in my free mini course is that you want to target the most obvious sound. So you want to practice that sound and continue to do different exercises in order to master that sound, and then get feedback. Did you improve your pronunciation? Have you mastered it? Yes or no? If not, go back and work on that sound. If yes, you can work on the next obvious or the next most obvious sound. And then as you continue to master sound by sound, you'll be able to master the sounds in English, American English, that is. And once you have finished step number 1, you have mastered all or most of the sounds, then I highly suggest that you learn the secrets of American English. What do I mean? Well, the thing is, you can master every sound that exists in American English. However, if you don't learn the little secrets or the tricks and different phenomenons that happen when words are put together, then you still won't sound like an American, or you still won't sound like a native English speaker with an American accent. Because how words sound individually isn't necessarily how they sound in a sentence, which is what I share with you guys in my connected speech videos. So for example, I will pronounce the sentence word by word. I am going to need to see him. Okay. So the I am going to turns into I'm gonna. And then the need to, the to turns into need to. So it turns into I'm gonna need to. See, it stays the same. But him, the H disappears. It can disappear. So I'm gonna need to see him. So even though you've mastered all of these individual sounds, these individual words, when they're put together, well, it kind of changes, and it might make it difficult for you to hear and understand what that native speaker is saying. And because you haven't learned that, then, well, you will always be unable to speak like an American because you don't know these rules or these secrets. But how are we going to learn these secrets? Well, I'm going to share with you some helpful tips and practices, of course, to be able to master that, but to learn about these secrets, because it's not always intuitive, you can get a nice resource. For example, this resource here, where of course you can learn the sounds, right? The individual sounds, problematic sounds, syllable stress, word stress, intonation, and then chapter 8, which I would say is kind of like the secret chapter. And that is how to sound like a true native speaker. Of course, there's other helpful information all throughout the book that's going to help you sound like a true native speaker. But this one, you got some really nuggets of gold there. And the link to this book is down in the description if you are interested in purchasing a book. And as promised, we have some helpful tips and practices. So along with everything I just mentioned, a practice that I find to be super, super helpful would be shadowing. Shadowing is when you repeat what a native speaker says like they say it. Some people will listen to, the radio or a podcast or whatever, and then repeat directly after them without pausing. Sometimes people will pause, repeat after the native speaker, play, and then pause, repeat after the native speaker. This will help you to hear what the native speaker is saying and to be more mindful of it. So it'll train you to be able to hear different things, as well as help you practice to say things just like a native speaker does. And through repetition, that will be really, really helpful. However, when you do this, like I mentioned, it's important to be intentional. So you want to ideally listen for certain things, especially if you are learning a new American secret or a specific sound. You could be listening for that sound as well, because you might realize wow, this person didn't pronounce better as better. They said better. Or they didn't say water. They said water. They didn't say city. They said city. So for example, if you are learning more about the flap T, which is like a fast T, you'll be able to hear it more in connected speech. And whoa, the speaker didn't say he bought a lot of gifts. They said he bought a lot of gifts. He bought a, right? So you start to be able to see and hear different patterns that maybe you didn't realize. So once you notice them, you can repeat them back. And this also helps you to, hear the melody and the rhythm of spoken English. Something that is, in my opinion, hard to just read in a book and learn. It's something that I feel like you really have to experience and listen for and to practice by repeating after a native speaker. And if you do this 5 to 10 minutes a day, or at least almost every day, or even 3 days a week, I think you'll see a huge improvement in your English over time. And you guys might have seen that I had a bonus tip, a bonus message, and that is if you shadow, if you really want to up your game and really see results, I highly suggest that you record yourself while you are shadowing a native speaker. So what this looks like is that you will get your phone, press record, you'll listen to a native speaker speak on, I don't know, YouTube or a podcast. They say a sentence, you pause it, you repeat it back, and then you play, you listen, you repeat it back. Meanwhile, your phone or whatever you're using to record will record that, and then you can play it back and listen. Because I know for myself, when I speak my second or third language, sometimes I think, wow, I had such good pronunciation and I said that so well. But then when I listen back, I'm like, oh my goodness, there were a lot of mistakes. And it might be discouraging at first to do that, but you will see once you know which mistakes you've made or what you are not repeating exactly like a native speaker, you'll be able to improve yourself each time you do this. Because if you don't know the mistakes that you're making, or if you can't hear it, or you're not evaluating yourself, then, well, you're not going to know what to work on and you're not going to get as good of results. And another quick tip would be, if you can, it could be encouraging to record your progress. So just before you start to embark on your accent reduction journey, you can do a quick little video or a voice note, record yourself, and then, months down the road or years down the road, you can do that again and see how much you've improved. Because that's fun to be able to see, the fruits of your labor, the improvements you've made. And hey, if you've already been working on your accent and you feel like you are trying to make a lot of progress, but there isn't really a lot of improvement, you might find this video interesting, because that might be why you feel like you're not getting any better anymore. Or if you'd like to practice your connected speech and repeat after me, a native speaker, feel free to click here. Take care and bye-bye.